the CEO of the company INENSUS. We are a consulting company in the mini-grid space. Some of you may know me as the host of the podcast, The Mini-Grid Business. And I'm also the host and the moderator of this session today. This session is about data, about software, and about financing, and how we bring all of this together. I have a panel today consisting of two representatives from the digital platform providers, which are Nicole Bouris from VIDA and Razvan Sandru from Prospect. Then we have one representative from the investor and financial side, the investor and venture builder Persistent, represented today by Wairimu Karanja. And we have one representative of the private sector, PV, solar PV, and EPC, and mini-grid developer and operator, Alexis Rehbinder from GDS International. Nicole heads maybe Nicole, you wave quickly so that everybody knows who you are. Nicole heads the business development team at Village Data Analytics, VIDA, which is a geographic information system for our DRE sector. She provides over 8 years of expertise in the energy access sector with multilateral development banks and the private sector. Razvan, please wave quickly. Razvan works for GIZ Get Invest as part of the Prospect team. Prospect is an open source and free of charge data platform that automatically aggregates, verifies, and visualizes different sources of energy data. Razvan has worked most of the last 10 years in implementing results-based financing electrification projects, where this software platform can make a real difference. Wairimu, just show, hands. Wairimu is Kenyan, a passionate climate impact investor and a partner at Persistent, Africa's climate venture builder. And Alexis is the COO of GDS International, a company designing, installing, and operating large-scale PV systems and also mini-grids in Africa. And he is the president of the Alliance for Rural Electrification, the host organization of this conference, of course. He has been active in the rural electrification sector since 2018. We'll start with some targeted questions for each of the panelists before we go into a discussion, and then at the end of this session, which will take us up to some 1:30 p.m., we will then also involve you as the audience and hope we can have an active contribution and discussion with you. Nicole, you're representing VIDA. Tell us more about VIDA. Who are your target users? How can VIDA be used to identify viable project sites? And what is the main benefit of using your software?
Okay, I think I turned it on. So, hi everybody. So VIDA is a geospatial software that gathers data from different sources and allows energy sector experts to take optimal decisions in the space. So really our objective is to create the best software for people like you to take the optimal decisions with respect of what you are looking for. So we take data from 3 different types of data. So there's data that we buy, there's data that is publicly available in the sector, and then there's the data that you, as an user, you can upload. And who are these types of users that we have seen that have been using VIDA? So we have, more or less, we divide them in 5 categories. We have governments, we have consultancies like INENSUS, so we're very proud that INENSUS is using our software. We have multilateral development banks like African Development Bank, World Bank. We have developers, and then we have investors, so it will be very interesting to get your perspective. And so yeah, so they use VIDA in a very different way because each one of these guys has a different objective, right? But definitely optimal site selection is one of them. And so VIDA has various features and various analytics that can be applied. And the data sets that are usually used are the building count and the light at night and all of these data sets.
Yeah, Nicole, you consider your platform rather a kind of technology. You're not considering yourself as a data provider, right? You're considering VIDA as a platform that should be used, that has features that other platforms don't have. You were talking about, well, investors and consultants and private sector. What about governments? How can governments use your software?
Yeah, totally. So we define ourselves a software company because we focus all of our efforts on building the best analytical tool for the data that we gather in the sector. And governments definitely use our software in both the approaches that they usually take. Is it the bottom-up approach or the top-down? So the top-down is where the government creates a list of sites that they want to tender out to potential developers, right? And so they use VIDA and all the features. They create a list of sites based mainly, the two main data sets that we've seen that they use are the building count and the public institutions. So if the village has or doesn't have a public institution, and the bottom up. So that is when the developers come to the government and say, hi, government, I'd like to build this site. What do you think? And then at that point, the government uses VIDA as a due diligence tool.
Thank you, Nicole. Razvan, we've just heard from Nicole about VIDA. VIDA is being used to develop projects. When you have a greenfield, you need to understand what your project will look like. You can use VIDA to get deeper insights into where the best project sites are and what you want to do with these project sites. Once the systems have been installed and commissioned, you need a different type of software. And that is where you come in, correct?
Exactly. This is where Prospect comes in. Once the solar installations and the assets have been installed. So a quick intro to what Prospect is. It's an open source platform. The fruit of a collaboration between GIZ Get Invest and Access to Energy Institute. And the focus of Prospect is really digital monitoring, reporting, and verification. So digital MRV. And the focus of Prospect is to get automatically data in and data out. So we focus on APIs. Which is basically the way a machine communicates to another machine. And the goal is really to automatize and simplify data import and data sharing.
Yeah, but isn't that what, for example, Odyssey Energy does too? Isn't that a direct competitor to you?
So that's an often asked question. What is the overlap with Odyssey, and are we competitors, and how do we work together? And so let me start by saying that there is an overlap between Prospect and Odyssey. When it comes to this remote monitoring and data aggregation part, because both of us, we facilitate either asset owners or investors, finance providers, government programs to see the data that they require. So this is something where there is an overlap between the two platforms, but at the same time, there are also important distinctions. Because for Prospect, our focus is very much on the monitoring, reporting, and verification, and on getting this automated data in and out, and focusing on data sharing. Whereas Odyssey, as a commercial service provider, they offer a broad array of services, focusing and covering all sorts of project planning, project management workflows. So I think this is a distinction between us. And what is important to emphasize is that we can work, both of us, in parallel, but also in the same market, but also both of us can work complementary in a market. So we regularly exchange and see how we can complement each other. And the market is large, the potential is large, and I would say the more good digital solutions there are out there, the better.
Yeah, now there is one challenge in the sector. Whether you look at solar home system companies, mini grids, or other solutions, companies don't really like to share their data. Data is what makes them actually like stick out, right? That is what they worked for years. Like, this is now data that they gathered, and now they have it, and they built their own company on this, and now they're supposed to share it for free? Like, how is that supposed to work?
So maybe first thing to say, because actually discussing with a lot of companies and stakeholders, there's often misunderstanding between open source and open access. So Prospect is an open source platform in a way that the code behind the platform is open source, so it's publicly available, but the data is protected. And exchanging with, in the past months, with companies and with government agencies, and getting their feedback, we developed certain features linked to data sharing and data protection. So all data is protected. The data owner, which are mostly companies, they can decide in a very granular way with whom they want to share the data. And they can decide, I want to share these data points with the Electrification agency, I want to share these other data points with an investor. So they can very granularly decide with whom to share data. But also, Prospect has a detailed user management approach, so they can decide who is able to only visualize the data, so see the visualizations, who could import, export the raw data, etc. So these are certain ways that we build based on the feedback coming from the companies. Now, to answer your question on will the companies share the data, this depends. So for now, we've been working and we've been piloting Prospect in certain markets. In certain markets, like in Uganda, for example, we work with the UACCC, which is basically managing a results-based financing fund. And so one of the conditions is that companies need to use Prospect to share data with UACCC. And so it's part of, let's say, the project requirement. And in other cases, we've worked with companies more to get feedback. But most, when it comes to concerns of the private sector, is not so much sharing the data with Prospect, but it's more towards sharing then the data with governments.
So what you're saying is that there is a trust relationship between the companies and your platform and your team.
Yes.
But then that kind of trust relationship ends where the data is then provided further from your software to the government entity or to the investor or to the financier or to any other stakeholder.
Yes, and often companies would require certain, let's say, data governance around it, which is a dialogue between, let's say, the Electrification agency or the regulator in a certain country or market to set the rules to make sure that not only one company shares the data, but all companies share data equally and making sure how the data is treated.
Okay, thank you. Wairimu, you're from the investor side, right? Venture builder, investor. You rely on data. You must rely on data to project your cash flows. Now, how in Persistent, how are decisions being taken? How much data do you use and where do you see gaps?
Okay, thanks a lot for that. So data is very useful, and you'd mentioned before that a lot of a company's value is actually in their data and in their intellectual property. So as Persistent, we make investment decisions based on various factors, right? So we'll look at the team, we'll look at the market opportunity, the value proposition that the business has, the unit economics, the customer base. So in looking at the market opportunity, you really do need to know what the company is presenting in terms of data, because then that will also be able to help us assess, what is the potential for the business to scale? Where can we venture build them? We have tech venture builders. And what's the potential also for exits? And that's always a big question, especially for venture capital investors. So I'll give sort of two examples. The first one of the value of data is one of the companies that we've invested in that's based in Nigeria is Beacon Power Services. And I think Christine from Beacon is in the audience here. And they have an innovative solution that focuses on energy efficiency, especially for utilities. And one of the interesting things when we were assessing them was, they looked at the market and they saw that especially utilities were collecting, 60% or less in collections of the power that was being distributed, just due to systems losses and just inefficiencies in the system. And they've figured out a way to help these utilities collect data and be more energy efficient, and now they're making more collections. That's more money for the utilities, more money for C&I companies, and that's why the business is attractive. And the second example that I'm going to give is, so Babel Horn in the morning talked about Say Africa or CEI Africa, which is a mandate seeded by KFW that the persistent team is advising on. And part of one of the, so we manage the crowd lending window, and there's another company, Greenmarks, that manages the RBF window. And part of the data partners that we have, I believe this is public information, is Odyssey. Because for RBF applications, the mini-grid companies have to go in and key in their data of, how many connections have they made, what type of customers are they looking at, what are the coordinates of the areas where they're operating, and based on that, they can get the RBF grants. Now that is not only helpful to us as the financier and to the company itself, but it's also helpful to the market, right? Because a lot of this information will then come out in reports. So it also ends up being not just for us a commercial consideration, but also an impact consideration, because we're not just a commercial investor, we're an impact investor. We were talking earlier, we keep saying, 700 billion people don't have access to electricity. But it seems like a big market, but the data has to drill down to, where is the demand? Where can this electricity be used?
Yeah, demand is a very sensitive subject because demand cannot easily be projected, right? And I don't think, and we can discuss this, of course, I don't think we will come to a conclusion in the coming years to project demand over 10 years or 15 years or 20 years accurately. So over recent years, I would say over the last 10 years, when these panels were held, right? Investors told everyone, we need data, right? We need projections that we can rely on. Now, what we understand today is that we will never get to these types of projections. Well, if you disagree, please discuss with me, but that is my learning, right? That is my learning. We will never get to this type of reliable projections of electricity demand, because we cannot say if there will be, I don't know, a flooding in 2 years from now, and then suddenly demand will drop. We don't know if some clever entrepreneurs will set up a factory in a certain community in 3 years from now, right? We cannot project that. We don't know. That entrepreneur may not be inside the community now as we are surveying it, right? So therefore, demand projection is very, very difficult. Do you want to come in? Well, Alexis, you will also get your opportunity.
Super quick. We're just, at VIDA, I believe this. I come from the sector, I've worked for a mini-grid developer, I agree. We're just trying to de-risk this by providing enough data to hypothesize at least. So for example, we're adding climate data, we're adding environment data, and that has projections, and that has scenarios, and then we have agricultural data. And so in that case, you can infer that given that there's high agricultural productivity, there is a possibility that, some investor, or rather investor, some clever local agricultural, I don't know, entrepreneur can come in and set something up. So we're trying, but I do agree with you totally.
Alexis, please.
So, I mean, we will not have projects upon 10 years, mainly because the amount of data which are available is too low for one developer. I mean, if tomorrow, as a developer, I'm able to electrify an entire country, then the variability on the demand will be low.
Portfolio effects, yeah.
Yes,
the
exactly.
portfolio effect
the portfolio is very
somehow mitigated
on mini grids, but it's not. And there is a second aspect of that, is that me as a developer, I have to create the demand. So data is not only useful to predict demand, but also to give me ways to create demand in a specific village. As an example, I can say, okay, what are the agricultural activities in these villages? What type of machinery can I provide to the village to make sure someone will create this manufacture, which will create demand for material in the country. So instead of just trying to predict what will be the evolution of one dedicated village, we have to force the fate of the village to become a high consumer place.
Yeah, but after all, it all depends on the entrepreneurs, right? If you have entrepreneurs in the village, then all your activities in providing maybe deferred payment schemes for certain machines or appliances may be welcome and received. But if you don't find entrepreneurs, then, well, no chance.
Yes, of course, you always have this risk. But I believe that in many places around Africa, because it's the place we know as a mini-grid developers, there is entrepreneurs. I don't think that there is lack of entrepreneurs. I think there is lack of financing and lack of opportunities to be grasped by local entrepreneurs. So, but to efficiently develop demand, we also need to have access to data. So it's not only to predict, but also to be able to activate this demand.
True. To the extent possible, of course, right? There are always limitations to that, and we can discuss about that later. Now, Wairimu, like, as an investor, if you cannot accurately project cash flows, because you cannot accurately project demand, where's the business case? Is this an investment case at all?
Well, I think you are right that you can't accurately project demand 10 years down the line. But what we look at is data that really shows how an entrepreneur, how the companies see the market, whether they understand their customers, whether they understand some of the customer behavior, some of the cultural behaviors that come with customers, right? One of the things that happened, obviously, with solar home solutions is that, there was a boom in solar home solutions, and then, with COVID, etc., there were, issues with the fact that, customers who were earning less than $1 a day were earning way less than that, and so could not make their repayments. But what we try and look at when we're looking at business models for our investee companies is how much innovation is there to also project and be prepared for some of these eventualities. So you may not be able to tell whether there's going to be a flood or whether there's going to be a force majeure event or whether there's going to be COVID, but what are the contingencies that you have in place? Do you understand the market? Have you created a relationship with your customers that show that they have a real need for you, and you're not just sort of, I guess in the VC sense, just spraying and praying, right? Just, putting in a lot of money into the market because you've got a lot of, whether it's investor funding or grant funding, without a clear plan of what's going to happen when things get bad. And that's something that some of the companies that we've worked with, have proven consistently, like I mentioned, Beacon, some of the SHS companies like Altec in the DRC, who have taken the time to really understand the market and use some of the data they get, like with Altec using the Angaza platform, just making sure that they're getting data on collections and when collections are late and what the customer preferences are and what type of, solar home solution that's hitting the market and getting very popular. Then they can be able to project what to supply.
Yeah, but what measures do they provide? Like, what do they do if an economic crisis hits? If an, I don't know, environmental disaster hits? Like, what do they do? You said they must be prepared. What options do they have? What levers do they have?
Well, it's more about having, and this is now moving away from data, but having more sort of risk mitigation strategies to make sure that they are mitigating for risks. So moving aside from data, when it comes to things like making sure that you have more diversification in your business to cater for things like the forex fluctuations that come over time, or having strategies for better, actually being able to check through your data collection where the gaps are when it comes to, for instance, revenue collection, right? Why is it that in certain times of the year, you're collecting less revenue? Well, it's probably because, especially in the African context, after the long rains or after the harvest season, people have more disposable income and therefore can pay better and purchase more solutions. So again, gearing your business strategy towards that and maybe not bringing in a lot of systems and selling them during the dry season when people don't have a lot of disposable income is something to consider. But that, again, goes into data collection and making sure that you've got your patterns correct.
True, and I believe that in the solar home system sector, there's probably a little bit more flexibility compared to the infrastructure sector, mini-grids, where you select one village and then you're basically married with this village, right? You cannot move out. You cannot move to the next village because like the flood has not hit the next village, but you must actually make it work in this village. And we can discuss about this later. Alexis.
And just if I may, to come back to what you said earlier, that's also why for our developers it's really difficult to share data, because the data we share is a proof that we are capable to create a business model and not just provide an equipment and let the village life. So that's why for us it's critical to share data, and that's why we will not be able to just publish it and be on an open source.
Open source or open access, yeah.
Open access.
Yeah. Alexis, what type of data does a developer need to develop a mini-grid? And would you find all of the data in platforms like VIDA?
We will find part of it, but not all of it, because
tell us where the gaps are. That's the most important part.
A little bit, but just a general message is that part of the data, what it's a personal belief, can only come from the ground. So you need to go to the village and to assess. I mean, you can count the number of buildings from a satellite view, but you cannot know who is living there, what are the activities, what are their means of living, and et cetera. So GDS, when we are developing a new project in the village, we systematically go in this village and try to grasp as many data as we can, but from the ground. And this has a lot of value as well, so it's also difficult to share this one, to come back to this to what we said before. But anyway, we need data like the one from VIDA to select a good village, but sometimes we don't have to select it, we just have to electrify it, and then just to define the good business model for each new village, we have to go there and understand how it works.
Sure, like software does not avoid site visits, of course. But Nicole, do you want to respond to that and maybe explain to what depth you're already going, into what depth and where the limitations are?
I completely agree. I never say, don't ever go to the field. Impossible, impossible. The thing is that with VIDA, we just give you that preliminary data. So with VIDA, you'll see the building count, as you said, the accessibility, so to bring in your components, obviously, right? Is there a main road or not? It gives you agricultural data. It gives you the wealth index. This is preliminary data for your due diligence. It gives you that initial filtered list to which then you have to go to the ground. But at least you have that filtered list. And you're not just going to the ground randomly. Like when I was working in the sector, in mini-grid, but also solar home systems, you're in the back of a car just trying to find that site and you're lost and it's just a mess. So this is where VIDA comes in.
Yes, I would add that for regulator, it's very important to have data like VIDA as one. For regulator, for the regulator, and for us as a developer, it's important that the regulator has access to this data, to him to have a real planification of which village he wants developers to electrify. And the issue is when this data is not available and when the regulator is not using it quite well, it's creating a lot of, we are losing money by studying villages which in fact, are not available for electrification.
Yeah, thank you, Alexis, because the regulator is actually what I believe, or what we at INENSUS believe, is the role of the regulator is very much underestimated, right? The regulator has so much data. Like, they need to calculate the tariffs. They need the CapEx data, they need the OpEx data, they need the demand data, they need everything. They have everything like in their files. And I believe that there is a big opportunity to help the regulator sort that data, use it better, and maybe even provide it to investors or to developers or, well, through your platforms or through your platforms, whatever, right? Whereas you would probably rather come in the evaluation. Is the mini-grid company actually delivering according to what they promised? Have they connected enough customers? Are they actually doing what they promised? Yeah.
Yes, but I would also add that it's important to close the loop, because you also discussed this briefly earlier, that once a developer has installed a certain set of mini-grids and you get the data, the real data coming from those mini-grids, how do we get the data to flow back into softwares like VIDA, and how do we get that, or Energy Access Explorer or other tools, to improve? Because yes, there is one about predicting demand, but there's, as Wairimu also said, we can use better data to at least have better hypotheses, be better at estimating it. And I think this is kind of like the loop that we have to close, so that the data from the monitoring platforms can then flow into planning platforms to be able to make better assessments. And of course, me as prospect, or not me as prospect, but as a representative prospect, I would also underline that this is one of the kind of like the goals that we have to link the different platforms and to facilitate this data. Because also to what Alexis said, that data coming from one mini developer is too low to be able to really inform how the market is going. And you mentioned the role of the regulator in kind of like forcing or regulating which data has to be shared. And I don't know if you want to share a bit more, either from a mini-grid developer perspective or from an ARE sector head perspective. How do we get there for participating companies to feel comfortable sharing data? Is it through the AMDAs and the GOGLAs and the AREs? Is it through the regulator? How do we get there?
I would say it's more personal opinion, but I think, like you say, Nico, that the regulator has a key role to play here. And if you think about the main grid, there is a lot of available data which is not used, and how to define the right tariff for the main grid is also a big mess for the regulator. So we see that there is a lack of data, but the data is not used today to define a right tariff. So I really think that we should go through the regulator to oblige, in a way, all the actors in the sector to share data, to then allow only the regulator to define new policies, but not to share it. I'm not comfortable with the idea to share it with everybody on an open data basis, but just to allow the regulators then to define new policies thanks to that. But I don't know if, as investors, it's a good answer, because I'm sure that as an investor, I would like to have access to as many data as I can to evaluate an opportunity, investing opportunity.
Yeah, how do investors actually work together with regulators? The data is with the regulators. Do you tap into that?
That's an interesting question. I think a lot of the work that we do with regulators is really more of sometimes the pressure that is needed to make especially countries, sectors, more attractive to investors. So, and some of the governments have been very active in having roundtables with investors. And I think about a month ago, I was in a roundtable that involved also, development finance institutions and the Ministry of Energy in Kenya, trying to understand how they can increase more energy sector investments in Kenya. And aside from the usual, tax incentives, making sure that there is accessibility to the market for investees, is also the fact that there needs to be more information about the opportunities in the sector. And that is data. And the governments are, number one, a treasure trove of information because they have the data, right? They have the data from the utilities, they have the data that the regulators collect, and they have the data that the regulators collect from, companies that are registered. So if you think of all the advancements that we've had over time, it's really been a question of, companies and innovators building off of innovation that is already in what we call the public domain, right? And yes, businesses have their trade secrets, but there needs to be, even more regulation about data sharing by businesses that is not necessarily trade secrets, so that we can have more innovation around the solutions that are being offered. That's one way of doing it. And then the other way of doing it is the government using its own present platforms to collect data. And I was discussing with an investor friend the fact that there's a lot of data that is collected during national census data collection, and a lot of it may, is more about, well, okay, and now we know a household is, 5 or 6 people in a household because of how much, the government finds when it goes into the rural areas. But what about, things like, energy access? How much do you have grid power? Do you not have grid power? Do you have, even in relation to healthcare, universal access to healthcare? This is data that can be collected from one sheet of paper that can be very useful for various sectors and various actors in the market, just using a very well-defined template of data collection. And since some of these things go into now almost,
human rights,
access to clean energy, access to healthcare.
I think healthcare you've got covered, right? In VIDA. Telecom, covered.
Sorry. We're working on it. So it is one of the partnerships that we're trying to get. But in some countries it is available, and some, I'm trying to.
Schools, education?
Yeah, covered.
Covered, all right. Good, so a lot of that data is already there. It's just about using the right tools. All right, I would like to come back to the subject of the regulator once more. We already said the regulator has the data. The regulator may not have this data very well organized, but it's there, right? And it must be there with the regulator, because the regulator determines the tariffs. And to determine the tariffs, the regulator needs a lot of data. The problem that the regulator has is that, and many regulators in Africa are very much frustrated because the levers they have are very short. Tariff regulation does not really change the revenue of an African mini-grid company very much due to price elasticity. If you go to a household and tell the household, hey, now you need to pay 50% more, then the household says, well, but I just have this budget. Okay, then I just use less electricity, but I spend the same, right? So after all, in most cases in Africa, the revenue for the mini-grid company is the same, almost independent of the tariff, like with certain limitations, of course. So therefore, the regulator, if they increase or decrease the tariffs, it doesn't have any effect on the profitability, really. It has more of an effect on the electricity consumption, on the system sizing, on the requirement of additional generation distribution assets. So no, that's why we, as INENSUS, as a consultant, we are working with governments and regulators a lot. We are pushing a lot when we create grant funding programs to empower the regulator to tap into grants and make sure that the regulators get a lever. Because at the moment, they're basically just there to sign off the licenses. They cannot do much more than that, right? And they must get access to subsidies, to grants, some influence, not something that they designed on themselves, but at least some advice that they give to the REA here in Nigeria, for example, and say, hey, this company is dying, right? This company is dying because the projections have not developed, like the real demand has not developed as projected. And we have reviewed that, and we considered it reasonable. It's now happening. It's not happening now. So we need to support this company. So what is happening? Alexis?
And you mentioned a third actor, which is key for me, is the grant provider. Today we see too many grant programs who are just like a basic fee for a connection with no long-term visibility. And I think that grant providers should accept to have to work with the developer on the village for maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, to collect real data from this very specific village and to see, as you said, if the demand has not developed as we expected, how can we adjust the grant level without having to adjust the tariff. And this doesn't exist today, in my opinion, to have a grant program who can be used for maybe 10 years.
Yeah, a staged implementation would be such a mechanism. You start with a small project, and then after 3 years, you know how your demand development curve, the trajectory will look like, and then you just extend to the level that exactly meets the demand of that community.
Exactly, and you can do that without having to use data from other villages or from other developers and so on. You can just use the data which is here. It means for one village, one developer, how many kilowatt he was able to spend. You can put targets, of course, but then you can just see the curves and adapt year by year.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that you just need that one village. Like we keep saying that demands develop in a square root-shaped curve, but well, we don't have any statistical proof, right? So therefore, we need data, right? We need data from you, deliver, and then we can finally tell the regulators here, this is the average case. Now we are here.
Actually, you needed data from him, but we are facilitating you and the regulator and everyone else who needs to see the data to actually have access to the data and only have access to the right type of data. But the actual data still comes from the mini-grid developer.
True, and that brings us to the question, would you share your data?
I don't know. No, definitely I would share, but in an anonymous way, maybe only with the regulator and so on. And I will come back to the loop you mentioned. If we share data which will not be used to then improve the visibility we have on what is really cool, what is the real curve of how many kilowatt-hour we can sell, and so on. There is no. It's useless to share it. So we need to have this active loop, which is used to update the models, updates available data, updates the village which are electrified, the one which are not, where there is some schools, where there is no, and so on and so on and so on, to not stay with the one picture we would take maybe this year and build all the program, the 20-year program, based on just one picture. So it's a dynamic. And for a developer, there is a value, a big value to have access to this. So we can, in a way, of course, it's difficult to share the data, but if we can have something back from it, I mean, the deal is quite fair, I think.
Can I ask a question? So let's say VIDA comes up with a survey and we go with all of the developers, right? And we say, hey, share with us this data. We will anonymize it. We'll include it in VIDA. You would be okay with it?
Okay, so it's a more complicated question because...
Let's talk about concrete.
No,
because this is what we would love to do. I mean, on our side, VIDA comes with data that is, because it comes, we're not a data company, so we get it from sources. As soon as that data is updated at the source, we automatically update it in VIDA.
Yeah, but how anonymized would that be? You link it to a village.
Yeah, that's
right?
true, exactly. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But we could talk about more countrywide, if that is. But again, we were talking about this morning. How useful is it because you're so connected to a village? That's true.
Exactly.
That's true. We could talk about it on an LGA level, for example, in Nigeria.
It's not a question only for me. It's only for the investor side. It's difficult to share it. But I mean, on our point of view, share it with a regulator, which is a third party who will use it to build new policies. It's okay. Share it with a service provider. I don't know. The question, we have to raise it. Difficult to answer now.
I think, well, from the investor side, we'll look at it in two ways. And sometimes we have encouraged companies to share data through reporting. The first way is obviously, I mean, data, depending on the data, is at the core of the value of the business, right? So if it's really, really sort of core to your business, valuable, source code type, intellectual property, trade secret processes, then we'd say, think about it before you share it or don't share it, because if someone else does the exact same thing, and that's how we look at it, if someone else has the exact same solution, then what is your unique selling point, right? And then the next thing is, when you share data, then you actually demonstrate your competitive edge, because investors, customers will compare you to the rest of the market. And so it's not just about, helping the market, but it's also about communicating your competitive edge. It's sort of like, and we were talking about it in the morning, it's like communicating a teaser. You don't have to share all the data, but share enough data to show what a great company you are and what's your unique selling point and what's your unique value proposition in the market. And sometimes, companies will hold on to data that they think is very valuable, but it's actually either, data that's in the public domain, or it's data that actually does need improvement. Somebody actually needs to catch or help you catch that gap. And of course, we will always, we keep things confidential. We will not share what you have told us not to share. We will enter into NDAs. And sometimes as a young, investing in young venture capital companies, being able to know and talk about some of the company's business helps us think about partnerships, helps us think about opportunities for aggregation, about how businesses can even partner to scale, and also helps us think about what partners we can have in terms of growth stage investors, right? Because if we're looking at an early stage company, we are already thinking about, can a fund like the Energy Entrepreneurs Growth Fund invest, or can E3 invest, or can a DFI come in and put in more money, or can Shell buy out the company, like Shell bought out Daystar, which in 2022, which was one of the companies we invested in. And that, what's the common denominator? There has to be movement of information And so there has to be some form of sharing of data.
All right. Thank you. If there's no direct response, I would like to open the discussion to the audience. Can I invite somebody to take the microphone and run around with it? Where you want to ask the first question immediately?
First question is for the data platform people. I'm curious to understand what's the functionality of the future that you're building. You talked about climate data. One thing that we would love to see in a platform like VIDA would be measuring emissions from diesel generators, which obviously ties into demand. My understanding is that's very difficult to do. People are looking into how to do it, but things like that would be helpful to understand what's the roadmap for development. I work for Husk Power, by the way. My name is William Brent. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Really great question. We just hired 2 AI engineers, and I just had a session with them before coming here. I was like, guys, give me the latest cool things that we're trying to work on, because I'm going to have to show them off on this panel. As much as I would love to talk their jargon, I did write a couple things down. So we're working on 2 different things in terms of AI, and then definitely climate, so I'll talk about that. But so something called the language models, which is in our jargon, it's like ChatGPT, where we would love to facilitate, really to allow people to talk to the data more easily without having to think about which filters they want to put in or which feature they want to use in VIDA. So you could just tap in and tell the AI, the language model in VIDA, and say, hey, find me the best sites based on what I care the most, which is this, right? Or we're even thinking, okay, many of the developers or even the investors need a cover page whenever they are talking about their portfolios. So please, VIDA, write something for me that describes my portfolio of sites that I have selected through VIDA. So that initial paragraph, for example. So these are things that we are trying to work on, and that hopefully will come next in VIDA. And then, so these are more on the feature side, and then we have the data side. Again, we're not a data company, but we have people in VIDA that are constantly looking for new data sets. And one of the new data sets, obviously, is climate, environment. We know that for developers, protected areas are extremely important. And so we just closed a deal with such data providers, and we're looking even into corruption or data that is a bit more on the governmental side of things.
And if I can add, I'm not sure if I fully understood, because there was a point where but you mentioned about emissions from diesel and the diesel use, and so Prospect can basically visualize and collect and visualize and aggregate all data that can be metered. In parallel, Access to Energy Institute in Nigeria has a pilot on looking at diesel generators, replacing diesel generators, and metering the consumption coming from these diesel gensets. And they're using Prospect to also monitor this. So if I'm going in the right direction, it's to...
It was more on the demand forecasting for communities where we might want to build a mini grid, right?
Okay.
All right. Any further questions or comments, or tell me whatever you said is bullshit? I love that. Yeah. Just hand over to maybe from back to front or whatever. Yeah. The microphone will find its way.
Yeah. My question is around invisible data or depressed demand. So, I mean, we heard this morning around the question about really you can't just predict. You can't just sit back and wait for the demand to be there. You have to actually create it. And one of the innovative ideas that are coming up these days in supporting profitable businesses is to integrate business models with productive uses, or looking more around the communities, the hidden data in terms of demand. If you are able to connect your electricity and productive users in a community. How do you assess that suppressed demand, or how do you assess that invisible data?
Can I answer to this, maybe? So I believe when we look at productive use, well, if you take this classic, okay, you electrify a village and then you foster productive use, you need scale. You need 20,000, 30,000, 50,000, even more connections, right, to finally become viable. Of course, this is an approach that is required to electrify the vast majority of the African continent. But if you start, I believe we should change the perspective. I think as a company who enters this sector and who has, or which has not doesn't have the opportunity to start with 50,000 connections tomorrow, don't look at how can productive use help my electricity case. Rather look into how can I find sites where there is a big business model in mining, in agriculture, something that is untapped, where there is potential, but which needs electricity, and then bring electricity and connect the surrounding community. I think, like, as a startup company, I think that is the perspective you should take. And it's, from my perspective, easier to identify these opportunities than identifying opportunities in an existing community and help the small millers or the entrepreneurs who don't even know that they're entrepreneurs to build up something, right? So any addition?
I just would add that productive use is a response to the problem of demand risk, but you cannot just decide to put a mill in a village and hope that this will help you sell more electricity. So even by developing productive use, you have to take into consideration the specificities of your village, and this can be done by collecting, once again, data about what is the economical main activities in the specific village, and then try to bring the right productive use equipment to the right place, in a sense.
All right, thank you. Next question.
Can I? Sorry, Nico.
Yeah,
sorry. No, just also in answer to that, we at VIDA, again, we try to gather as much data as possible and out there, and try to allow to our users to cut and slice the data as much as possible. So one of the data sets that we have is on agricultural. And so we have, for example, the 5 top dominant crops in an area per each village. We have the yield in that village. And so from a mini-grid perspective, and if you have these, you need demand stimulation activities, you can go targeted to a village with a specific appliance that they are currently, in a way or another, using for that specific crop. So this is how we at least try to add value in demand stimulation and productive use specifically.
Yeah, and if you take that perspective, I guess that investors would also look at your business case differently, right?
Is this on? Yeah.
Yes.
First of all, thank you for a very good discussion at the panel and some really good moderating. It was really nice to follow. My name is Magnus Nielsen. I work for the Danish DFI called IFU. And I think the potential and advantages of data collection, analysis, and sharing is clear. But a question for you, VIDA, at VIDA. What is your vision? Where do you dream of ending with your product offering? And what is your wish list from different stakeholders like financiers or developers or regulators?
So my wish list is that everyone in the sector uses VIDA, so we all start from the same baseline and we can all cut and slice the data similarly. No, but really, for example, one of the things that I would love in terms of partnerships, we always look for new partners that can provide data to us. So an example is going to governments and asking them to share more up-to-date data regarding their grid, because grid is extremely important in this type of business, obviously. And that is not really updated on a constant basis, and it's something that we need to find a way to do. And also other data providers, obviously, that can provide more data to us from the sector. But we are aware that data is a very sensitive topic, right? As we were saying, you don't ever want to share data, and so we try to provide that baseline from which everyone can start from. Did I answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
It would be great if VIDA could measure the impact of mini-grids in any village, so to measure how many people you have connected, how many electricity we have spent, we have produced and sell and so on, and the economic growth of a village.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, given that VIDA has this progression, so we update the data in time, then what you can measure is that if you see the productivity of a village that goes up and you have a mini-grid there, you could infer and make the connection. At the same time, we would love to work more with Prospect, and we work already with Odyssey, so we have data that comes automatically into VIDA, and so we can measure the connections, for example. So we're totally open to these kind of partners.
All right, can we have another comment?
Okay, my name is Calvin from the African Mini-Grids program by UNDP, and I've got two questions. We have so much discussed about data collected by developers, VIDA, and so forth. But at the end of the day, there is the consumer, and we collect data from the consumer. So in this aspect, what approaches, what principles do we put across to make sure that the consumer is protected, the data from the consumer is protected, he or she is not exploited, and as much as we want to do business, we want to collect all the data that we could, the consumer is protected. And the other question is about approaches to data quality. Everybody can agree with me that we want more data. We want to collect as much data as possible. When we collect this data, how do we collect the best quality data to give us the best insights for us either to improve efficiency or to improve business viability for mini grids?
I can touch on the first part of the question on consumer protection and data protection, and then happy to hand the next part on the quality of the data to Prospect, VIDA, and GDC. So the good thing, thankfully, is that from a regulatory perspective and also from a corporate governance perspective, data protection and careful use of consumer data is very important. So if you look at, a lot of the investors are compliant with the GDPR, so would like their investees to be compliant with the GDPR. And more importantly, African governments have, over the years, been rolling out data protection legislation that requires things like respect of the right to privacy and no abuse of personal information. So if you look at, for instance, Nigeria, I was looking, interestingly, we have an event, and I was looking at the Nigeria data protection law just to see what disclaimers and consents we need to get for the event that we are hosting on Thursday. But they have more requirements on the type of questions you should ask about consent. And I think normalizing that in some of the data collection, whether it's on-site or online templates, is very important. Same thing with Kenya, where there are requirements for people to be registered as data controllers and data processors. Now, from an investor side, at the ESG level, when we're conducting our ESG due diligence, we always check, do you have a data privacy policy? Are you compliant with data protection laws? And not just your data privacy policies, but you may have a policy, but how do you implement it, right? How do you collect data? And you can tell from some of the answers that come in that, maybe you do need to have a data privacy sensitization training, because a lot of, especially the customers in maybe the rural areas, may not be very familiar with their rights, with their data rights, or may, if someone offers you certain solutions, connections, where you don't pay for a certain period of time, or clean cooking solutions where you're also going to get carbon credits, then you might think, okay, what do you need me? Where do you need me to sign? And what do you need me to fill? So there's a lot of regulation that is required there. But the good thing is, investors are playing a key role in requiring data privacy compliance, and B, governments are also playing a key role, especially African governments, in developing the legislation.
So, Razvan, before you jump in, let me come from the sideline and refine the question a little bit. You're working with your platform in many different countries, right? Each of these countries has a specific data regulation or law. Like GDPR for Europe is okay, but then you go into all these other countries, right? How do you manage this? Is it possible to manage this?
Well, the silver bullet that we're trying to use to solve all our problems is to not store personal data from the beginning. So the way Prospect deals with personal data is it's either being hashed, blurred, or encrypted. So no personal data as such is stored on the Prospect server. And this allows us to be basically compliant to most of the legislations in countries, because this is like kind of like the way to deal with the problem is to avoid it from the beginning. And I think for the purpose of what Prospect is being used, it also fits the purpose, because it's about identifying trends, looking at statistics, looking at aggregations. In certain cases where we're looking at verification, in that case, the personal data like names, phone numbers, etc., can be encrypted, so they stay protected. But in most of the cases of Prospect, it's less about identifying John or Mary, but it's more identifying types of customers and patterns and trends. So this much to the part on data protection. What I also wanted to talk to answer on the question of data quality, because this is also one of the missions or the problems that Prospect is trying to solve or to contribute to solving, is through this automated data import, to go away from having companies manually report or some sort of manual data transmission, where you don't know if someone has manipulated the data, you don't know where the data is coming from. And so there are aspects of data integrity and traceability that Prospect is trying to solve through this machine-to-machine communication. And the other thing is by using several sources of truth. So in a case of a solar home system, we can look at data coming from the CRM. We can look at the data coming from the payments. We can look at the technical data if there is consumption. And so you have several sources of truth linked to one system and one connection, which further increases the data integrity linked to that system.
That's on quality of data in your platform. And I guess the subject on like user data is more relevant on the metering side, like where you have the Stimacos and the Spark meters, or our platform, the Micropower Manager, which is basically a customer management platform, an open source software. And there we basically pass on this, this problem to the users. Like, we have an open source platform, you install it on your server in your specific country, take care of your specific legislation, and then run it. And this is how we are doing it, yes. Any additional question? Yeah, let's have these two over there, please, and then we come to the front.
Hello. Thank you so much for the talks. My name is Mohamed Zodi Saddam from NORCAP and UNDP. So we are working on a project called Decarbonizing Humanitarian Energy. We help UN agencies and NGOs to decarbonize their operation. And one of the things we look at is energy access for displacement context, for refugees, for IDPs. I would like to know if you have data on that, or if it's something that you are looking into. We'll be happy at NORCAP to collaborate with VIDA to collect data on that as well. Yeah, thank you.
Definitely. It depends a bit on the country, right? It depends on the office of, I don't know, UNHCR or IOM in that country. And if they are willing, again, to share that data, because not all the time they're willing to share that data, then we integrate it. Definitely, energy access in displacement settings is a bit my soft spot. So I always try to integrate that in the countries that we work in.
All right. One more question or comment?
This is Brad Matson from Husk Power. I want to kind of argue with Nico a little bit. I actually think we can project demand. And in fact, the key thing in terms of projecting demand is the data. But it's a little bit more. So I want to bring up the topic of AI.
Can you talk a little bit more? Because I cannot.
Okay. Close, okay. I want to bring up the comment of AI in terms of how we analyze the data. The data analytics is key. I can tell you now that we collect data and we can do it to generate a demand profile. We're about 80% accuracy that we know if we place a mini-grid there, we'll be profitable. So we're using data to drive demand calculations with about 80% certainty that we know it'll work. So I think I would argue with you differently that you can project demand. And then once the mini-grid is placed, we have a known history, doing 10 years now, we know what the demand increase will be yearly. So we can not only project initial demand, but sequential demand. The challenge really is the data, because VIDA doesn't have all the data we need that for our algorithm. The data's not all there. And then, of course, we can't give you the algorithm on how we predict demand. So there's AI component and there's a adequacy of the data. But I can tell you for sure, data can be used to project demand.
Yeah. Brett, do you think, like in your experience, do villages, can you sort villages into certain development trajectories, or like how do you find uniformly developing?
So we have an algorithm that gives us a count when we put all the data in, and we use our algorithm, we get a score between 0 and 100, and that score indicates the amount of the village a day of profitability, right? Okay. And then we can kind of arbitrarily decide we're going to take a score of 70 above, and those are the ones we go to. And then usually if it's like between 40 and 60, you have to have an RBF or something like that to make sure it works to bridge the gap. But yes, you actually can grade them and then see they form into certain areas where it will be viable or not viable.
Okay, thank you. All right. Shall we have one more? I think we are at 1:30 p.m. already. I think we have to move to lunch now, unless you're not hungry.
Maybe one point, because we had a lot of mail questions, and I see, someone in the audience.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let's have that one.
Right,
yeah.
So I think it will also go after I ask my question too. So, So I'm Dolako from Amfani, a energy brokerage company. So I also want to ask for specific data that has to do with utilities here in Nigeria. I do not know if VIDA has data that has to do with utilities related data for homes in different places, maybe here in Nigeria, and Lagos specifically. Is my question understood?
No, I don't.
All right, so
difficult to hear.
Yes, for utilities, like for homes generally. So because I know there is an aspect of energy as a service that I know energy companies are trying to go into, right, where they will generate tariffs for probably for homes or for if at all a particular area, a mini grid is placed in a particular area, right? I know that they have to generate tariff for a particular location if at all a mini grid is maybe placed for an estate or a particular place. So how do you then, do you have like available data for utilities related data, like, and maybe for homes generally? I want to ask that. And also for, I know you also look into MSMEs, that's for businesses, right? They are like specific, majorly for retail businesses, right? Those that do they sell like mini shops. I don't know. I'm talking about specifically here in Nigeria. Like, do you also have like data that has to like do with like retail businesses here in Nigeria? I'm just asking specific data question.
Okay, I think there are two questions. One is data in urban settings, maybe, and then the second one is on the MSMEs. That's what I understood. So we have, in a country, we generally base all of the majority, like the element that is most important is the building footprint. So the building footprint is available across all of Nigeria, and it's available across all sub-Saharan Africa, and it's included in VIDA. That is the unit that we start from. And that is available in urban, peri-urban, and rural areas. Now, in urban areas, the building footprint might be less valuable compared to rural areas, because in rural areas you usually have one-story buildings. So the size of the rooftop is important. Whereas when you go into urban areas, the size of the rooftop is less relevant because you might have multiple stories high. So we still have data, but it's up to you how you want to use it. We always leave it up to the user to whether, like, to use the data or not use it, right? Depends on what they're doing. On the second aspect regarding businesses, for us, we have satellite imagery, right? Like, so it's hard to say what is happening underneath that roof. I think this is what you mentioned, and we're very open about that, right? Now, what we say, though, is that we divide the buildings in VIDA into 3 categories, which are small, medium, and big. And the bigger ones, we assume that they are commercial businesses. This is in rural areas, again. And we give different load estimations to each one, right? So this is what we usually do.
And maybe I can touch on, I don't know if you work for a utility, but in terms of data available for utilities, I'd mentioned a company that we've invested in called Beacon Power Systems. It's actually a Nigerian-based company, and some of the representatives are here. And they provide energy efficiency and market data for utilities in terms of, you know, where are the distribution losses, where are they coming from, is the power actually being used by the customers, so then they can gauge out of the energy that they're actually distributing, out of the power that they're distributing, how much is actually being paid for by the customer, where are the losses, where are the inefficiencies, where is power being stolen, and then in terms of the customer can also gauge out of the power that they're paying for, you know, how much of it are they actually using, or is a lot of it actually being taken away by system losses and inefficiencies? And that's something you can have a chat with BPS about as well.
All right, let's wrap up this session. Thanks a lot, Nicole, Razvan, Wairimu, and Alexis for this exciting discussion. I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
While they do a selfie, just for the lunch break, FYI, the restaurant where you go is based on the color of your lanyards. So the yellow lanyards, you go to the red restaurant, which is here above the venue. And for the gray lanyard, it will be at the Sky, so it's top floor of the Eco Hotel. You can ask the hostesses. Sorry? Je te le dis.